So here in the empty Blender file, we can just select all of this and remove that. And the first thing, I want to build that sci-fi crate as a little bit of an exercise and introduction to the hard surface modeling and the booleans. So let's press Shift A and add a plane, and now I want to press Tab and let's scale this to the half of the size, so press S and 0.5. And now let's zoom in a little bit and we'll extrude this up 1.5, so E 1.5 and enter. And now I want to add 2 new loops in the middle here, so let's press Ctrl R and increase the number of cuts with the mouse wheel and confirm with the left mouse button and release with the right mouse button. And now we can scale this middle to something like 1.2, so press S and then Shift Z to lock this on an X and Y plane, and let's enter 1.2. So this will serve as a base shape for the crate. And now we can tab out and let's add a subdivision modifier by pressing Ctrl 2. So we are adding 2 levels of subdivision. And now I will right click and shade this smooth. So this looks nothing like a crate right now, so we need to add some supporting loops. So let's go back into the edit mode by pressing Tab, and we'll add some cuts in the top here. So Ctrl R and do a cut here and bring it up like this. Okay, now at the bottom, so Ctrl confirm and bring it down. So we are kind of eyeballing this. We just want a little bit more of a fidelity on the edge there. And now we can add a little bit more fidelity to these middle loops. So first of all, let's switch to the edge select by pressing 2, and now alt click here and alt shift click right here. So only these edge loops are selected. And now we'll press Ctrl B to bevel and add one more segment. So we are beveling with 3 segments. So let's confirm it like this. And if we now tab out, you can see we added some fidelity to this shape. And now the one last thing to do is to subdivide this a little bit more so it's not rounded at the top. So let's press Ctrl R, add 1 loop here, and release, and 1 here. So click to confirm and right click to release. And now if we tab out, this is what we want. This is the shape of the crate. So far nothing special. We just used some low poly object and subdivision modifier to create this kind of smooth surface. And now we could easily apply the subdivision modifier and edit this further, but I like to keep the low poly cage and the options of modifying this master shape open. So I will leave the subdivision modifier as is, and right now we can proceed to adding some more details. And that's where this starts to break down, because if you would just go in and add some more loops, if you want to create some hole or something like that, that would ultimately break this nice smooth shape that we defined. So for this reason, I really like to use Boolean modifier, the Boolean operations for this kind of details. And at the same time, these are non-destructive since these exist as a modifier and you're not modifying the mesh itself, and are great for prototyping. And at the same time, it will allow us to keep the original shape intact and the original low poly cage open for more editing. So best of all worlds basically. So to be able to do some kind of a cutout or detail in the shape, we'll need another object that will define the shape we want to cut out from this object. So every time you use a Boolean, you need 2 objects to interact with each other. So right now we'll prepare the first object, and let's go to the edit mode and just select this top vert and press Shift S and select cursor to select it. So we have a cursor there, and now we can tab out and add a cube here. So let's add a cube. And now we can go into the edit mode and press S to scale this down, something like this. And we can now switch to the top view by pressing 7 on the numpad and move this to the side. We'll leave the origin point here in the middle and move this in the edit mode. So let's press G, then Y, and move this to the side like this. So the edge of the crate goes through the middle of the cube right here. And we can now scale this up a little bit. So press S and X and scale it on X-axis. And we are just eyeballing it. This time I really want you to try to estimate the sizes here. I don't want to give the exact number values all the time. So you better get the grips of the modeling, and you get a little bit better eyeballing things and some freeform modeling. And now we can press S and Shift S. So we are just reducing the scale on the Y and Z axis like this. And now we can toggle the X-ray. So let's just hold Z. And if you activated the extra pie menu options, you should have the toggle X-ray here. So let's switch the toggle X-ray. And now I will just drag selection around those vertices down here and press S and X to create a slope like this. Okay, so now I want to cut out this shape from the crate here. So let me tab out and toggle the X-ray again. We can use the Boolean modifier right away, and there are two ways how you can do that. You can use the Boolean modifier natively right here in the modifiers tab, or you can use the Bool tool add-on that I've introduced in the introductory chapter. If you haven't watched it, I really recommend to do that right now, so you have all set up like I do. And now, just to explain things a little bit better, let's select the crate and let's collapse the subdivision modifier here, and let's add the Boolean modifier on top of that. And here you can just select the other objects you want to use for the Boolean operation. So I will click the eyedropper and choose the cube object, and you can see in the shading here something happened there, but you can't see that because if you use Boolean modifier, the second object actually stays in the scene. It's still there, and to see the result you would have to click this and hide. But that doesn't solve all your problems, because if you would render this, that Boolean object would still be visible in the render. So you would have to go here in the filters, enable viewport and rendering, and disable this in the viewport and rendering as well. So a little bit tedious work, and at the same time you now don't see the original object. You can select it and edit that. So the Bool tool add-on really helps with this stuff. Let me just press Ctrl Z a few times so we go back, and I will remove this Boolean modifier right here. And now if you have the Bool tool add-on enabled, you can just select this object, shift click the object you want to cut out from, and use the shortcuts Ctrl- on numpad, and you do the Boolean operation the same way. You can see the modifier is added here for you automatically. It's set to the difference operation because you press the Ctrl-. If you would press Ctrl+, that would be union. So the Boolean modifier is applied, but we can inspect what happened with the Boolean object itself. You can see there are only bounds visible here. So if we now select the Boolean object and go to the object properties and viewport display, you can see this is set to display as bounds, and at the same time the rendering is disabled there. So the Bool tool can help with all those tasks we would have to do manually and do all that stuff for us. So we have the bounds of the object, we can edit the object anytime and really have this interactive Boolean experience real time without any like additional setup we would have to do ourselves. So I really recommend to use Bool tool for that reason. And obviously we are not finished here because this doesn't look so great. You can see these weird shading issues there, and there's one way you can solve that. If you select the crate and go to the object data properties normals, you can enable auto smooth, and you can see it created a sharp edge right here as well. But if you make the angle larger a little bit, like 45 degrees, it will take this into account, and right now the shading issues are gone and you have this nice cutout. But as I mentioned in the beginning, seldom is the hard surface object this sharp. If you look really closer, this is really sharp edge, so there will be no light reflections on this edge whatsoever and stuff like that. So if you want to introduce a little bit more realism into your models, this is not enough itself. And we can help ourselves by adding bevel modifier to the modifier stack. So let me go to the modifiers tab. Let's collapse the boolean and we'll now add the bevel. And right now we'll have to do some setup with the bevel modifier. And if you used earlier 2.8 versions of the Blender, you might see that this looks a little bit different, but don't worry, it all works the same, but it's reorganized a little bit, it's cleaned up. So first of all, we'll need to set the amount, but before we do that, let's go to the geometry and disable clamp overlap. This will break this probably a little bit, and what this setting do, it limits the bevel so it doesn't break your geometry. But at the same time, if you set this amount to 0.1 meters with the clamp overlap active, you're not really getting a bevel with 0.1 meters. So I think it's best to just disable this overlap and reduce the bevel yourself to something more reasonable. And I think we are looking to something like, let's say 0.003. I think that looked great. And if you want to better see what the bevel modifier does, you can always enable the wireframe overlay. As you can remember, you can find it here and enable those overlays. I have a custom key mapped to that, so right next to Z, there's an extra key on my keyboard, and I have mapped to this. But if you don't have that extra key, and you have only the shift there, you can use the quick menu. So I've mapped the wireframe to my quick menu as well. If you right click here, you can add or remove from quick favorites, and then if you press Q, you have it right here, and you can enable disable overlay. So let's enable the overlay right now, and you can see what the bevel modifier does with your mesh. And right now we can switch the limit method to angle, and what that will do, basically it will create the bevels only on sharp angles defined by this angle here. So again, same as before with the auto smooth, we have a larger angle here than 30 degrees, so we'll have to update this a little bit. I think something like 35 will work, but here it's not enough, so let's go to that 45-degree angle. And now we got rid of those edges we don't want to have there, but here you can see on this cutout the bevel modifier applies, and it creates that extra geometry around those sharp edges that we really want. And now we'll just modify this a little bit more. So let's add one more segment here. So we are doing bevel with 2 segments. So basically we are creating a support loops. And now if you go a little bit closer, you can see this doesn't look so great, and that's the miter here. And you can change this outer to arc, and that'll create much better geometry for this particular case. So that's something I almost always do. And now if we inspect this a little bit closer, you can see how the Boolean modifier cuts through the geometry here and how it mixes up with the bevel. And it's not ideal by any means. You can see we have a large n-gon here, and this here looks a little bit weird. So again, this is not ideal, and that's why this technique is not suitable for like exporting game ready models and stuff like that. But we can use some other tools that Blender has to make this look good. And ultimately, for the illustration purposes, or if you just do some static renders and you need to prototype something really quickly, this is a great method where in the final render you can see basically no issues at all, and it will help you to really do your work much faster.